partners from 12 national sensory societies from different countries in Europe who created the European Sensory Society E3S, and since then the society has been growing, trying to facilitate the growth of sensory science throughout Europe, promoting cooperation, establishing and trying to enhance also the professional status of sensory scientists across Europe, and also, of course, to develop and disseminate research, and that is why we are here. So the first seminar will be led by the Children Working Group within E3S, but we will also have other webinars that will promote and present the different societies from the different countries, so we will learn from each other and hopefully have a better cooperation. So I want to introduce Monica Laureati from the University of Milan, from the Italian Sensory Society. She will be the moderator today, and she's the coordinator also of the E3S Children Working Group, and she will present the rest of the day. Welcome, and from today to May next year, we will celebrate our 10 years.
Thanks, Paola. I forgot to say one thing, that the webinar will be recorded, so it will be recorded. And I forgot to say that more than 130 people registered to the webinar. So now we are 80, so I imagine that many will join in the next minutes. Thank you. Monica, I think you have the microphone mute.
Yes.
Yes, now we can hear you. Yes.
Much. And can you see my slides?
We can see your screen.
So it's trying to put in presentation mode. It's working now?
Yes, perfect.
Good, thank you. It's working. So thank you again for the introduction, Sara and Paula. Good morning, afternoon, or evening to you all, depending on where you are from. And thank you for attending this webinar. I'm so delighted to see such a high interest in this topic. And the Children Working Group is glad to open the webinar series dedicated to the celebration of the E3S 10th anniversary. Today's webinar aims to illustrate the activities of our working group, and in particular, we are glad to present the results of a cross-national project on texture preference, food neophobia, and healthy eating in European children. Let me show you very quickly the program. So there are 5 planned talks. With the first one, I will introduce the B-tex project, focusing on the main challenges we face in running across national research. Then the next 4 talks will illustrate the results of each of the 4 papers we have recently published. And as Sara told you, questions can be asked at the end of the presentations. There will be 20 minutes dedicated to general discussion, and there all the B-tex team will be invited to take part to the general discussion. Let me start with a brief introduction about the activities of our working group. You might be already familiar with the aim and principles of our working group, which are to facilitate the exchange of research-based knowledge on the mechanisms influencing children's sensory perception and food preferences. The working group is active since 2013 and was previously coordinated by Margaret Herslet from Nofima, Norway, and is now coordinated by me. The working group counts 37 members from 12 different European countries, including 19 universities and research centers, and also 9 food companies. So this is a very diverse participation which fosters the creation of networks for building up research collaborations. Our main activities include workshops, meetings, webinars, and a research project, as you can see in this slide. For today's webinar, I will focus on a cross-national research project aimed at better understanding textual perception and preferences in European children. This project is called B-tex project. Why we called our project B-tex? Well, B stands for biscuits, which were chosen as target products to investigate texture. So that's B-tex project. So the challenges we faced with this project will be shortly introduced with this presentation. Let me start with the first challenge we faced, that is a project timeline, as you can see. The first project proposal was made during Eurosense 2016 when we decided to work on texture preferences. Then we proceeded with a request of interest addressed to the Children Working Group members and a request for funding to food companies. In January 2017, we appointed a scientific committee and an advisory board and started with the first preliminary cross-national test to verify the suitability of the food products. While on May 2017, during the E3S annual workshop, we made the official announcement of the project and then had a series of meetings to define the research protocol. The first one was in Milan. Then we prepared a data access and management agreement, and all participating countries submitted a request for ethical approval. And then we had our second and last meeting in Turku to define the last version of questionnaires and procedures that were preliminarily tested in each participating country at the beginning of 2018, so that the main experiments could be performed from April to July, and the first results have been presented at Eurosense 2018. So this is a very quick overview of our two-year project. And here I would like to mention the participating scientists. I would like to thank my colleagues that have contributed to this project, either as scientific committee or by running the experiments in the different countries. Concerning the aims and the products we used in our project, well, the general aims were to better understand textual preferences in children from different European countries, which is an understudied topic in sensory and consumer research with children, to develop valid and child-friendly procedures to investigate food neophobia, textual preferences, and children's driver of liking, as well as to explore the relative contribution of texture, taste, flavor, and appearance in children's appreciation of healthy versions of food. We decided to work on high-fiber biscuits, which were available on the Italian market, but not targeted to children. These biscuits were provided by an Italian food company, which also partially funded the project. This was not the only reason we chose to work on biscuits, also because these are suitable products to be used in our cross-national research, because they are almost stable over time, can be easily shipped across countries. They are well accepted across European children and can also allow different texture modifications. Concerning the target population, subjects came from 6 different European countries, from the northern to the southern part of Europe, including Finland, Sweden, the United Kingdom, Austria, Italy, and Spain. We invited 610 children aged between 9 and 12 years and their parents, and they were all recruited via primary and secondary schools. So here is just an overview of what was performed by children and parents. Children performed a series of tests, including the completion of a child food texture preference questionnaire that was a tool specifically developed in the B-tex project. Then children also answered questions related to child food neophobia scale. So we used a child-friendly version of this scale that was translated in the 6 languages and validated across countries. Then children rated the liking of the high-fiber biscuit and provided a description, a check-all data description of the biscuits. Parents provided information about anthropometric data, complementary information, food frequency consumption about their child, as well as socio-demographic information about the family, and also filled in the food texture preferences to report their own preferences. So details about these tests and relevant results will be given in the next presentation. This was only to give you a general overview of what we did. With my presentation, I would like to highlight some other challenge we faced while performing the project. The first one is related to the product. I have already mentioned this challenge, that is quite challenging, this point. And we had to protest, of course, the liking of the biscuits in the different countries to verify and to avoid extreme scores in dislike and like of such biscuits. Then also questionnaires and procedures were initially developed in English and then translated in each language and pilot tested in each country. So this was quite demanding, and to improve the comparability among countries, the main experiments were performed in a reasonable short time frame of 4 months. So of course, all questionnaires and procedures were the same across countries. But I think that the most challenging task was the design of the child food texture preference questionnaire, because in the next presentation, Valerie will explain you better about this tool, but very quickly, it consists of a questionnaire in which pairs of food pictures that varies, the picked food items that vary in food texture are shown to the children. So it was very challenging to choose food images that were appropriate for the different countries, and not only for different countries, for children in different countries. So this required several pre-tests and also lots of meetings and the discussion within the B-tex team. Also, the kata description was quite challenging because we had to select appropriate terms to describe the sensory properties of the biscuits, and the description were sometimes very different across nations. So this also required pre-test in each participating country. Another challenge we faced is related to the recruitment of the people. In cross-national research, is desirable to have people that are as much as possible comparable in socio-demographic characteristics, and it's not always easy to do that, but we try to manage with this point. And last but not least, the platform for data collection. We were lucky enough because the Norwegian research unit was in charge of setting up a platform for centralized data collection that made life easier during the project. Here are some of the products of our research. So we were able to present 5 oral and poster presentations in different international symposia. And here are the papers, the 4 papers that will be discussed in the next presentations from a cross-cultural perspective. So I would like to conclude with a big thank to all the B-tex team, because all of this could never have been achieved without the precious contribution of these excellent scientists, and I address to them my most heartfelt thank you. And I will now hand over to Cristina Proserpio from the University of Milan. Cristina will present the study entitled Child Food Neophobia Barrier of Healthy Eating, a comparison in 5 European countries. Thank you. Sharing. And leave the floor to Cristina. Cristina, please.
Okay. Can you see my slide?
They are coming.
Okay. They are visible now.
Put it in a presentation mode, please.
Okay. Let me know if it is working, please.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry. Here I am.
Yes.
So, Monica, for introducing me. It is a pleasure for me to be here today and to start this webinar showing you some of the results of the B-tex project. The results that I will present you are reported in this recent publication where you can find further details. Food neophobia is the fear to try new and unknown foods, and children with higher level of food neophobia may have a reduced dietary variety, leading to nutritional consequences. Indeed, it is well known that food neophobia is negatively related to daily intake and liking of fruit and vegetables, as well as of food of animal origin, especially fish. Moreover, food neophobia is reported also to be associated with the rejection of specific texture, for example, for food with pieces inside. And actually, there are different tools available for measuring food neophobia in children. However, it should be considered that most of them cannot be completed by the children themselves, but only by a proxy. So the first aim of the present study was to validate an efficient self-administered tool to measure food neophobia in children in different languages. The second aim was to compare food neophobia level in children from different European countries. And the third aim was to explore cross-national differences in the relation between food neophobia and food consumption. Here are reported the evaluation that were performed by the children and their parents. And as regards children, they have completed the child food neophobia scale. And a subsample of them were also involved in a test-retest of the same tool. They also have rated the liking of a series of high-fiber biscuits. Parents provided information about anthropometric measure of their children, and also give information, socio-demographic information, and completed also a food frequency consumption questionnaire for their children. The food neophobia level was measured through the child food neophobia scale that was validated in Italian in 2015, and it consists of 8 items answered on a 5-point facial scale. First of all, this questionnaire was translated in 5 different languages, so in English, Finnish, Italian, Spanish, and Swedish. And it was also translated in German. However, due to the low reliability of the item, these data were omitted from the subsequent analysis. Here are reported the internal reliability results and of the tool, and as demonstrated by the Cronbach's alpha values, it's possible to see that the reliability was satisfactory over all countries as well as by countries. And the association among items were also further investigated through PCA. And as can be possible to see, there was a positive association between items on PC1, demonstrating that they were measuring the same construct. A subgroup of Italian, Swedish, and British children were involved in a retest of the tool, and in the table are reported the values obtained during the test and the retest of each item of the tool. And as can be possible to see, no significant differences have been highlighted among the two evaluations, thus suggesting a temporal stability of the tool. Looking to the results about the food xenophobia level across the European countries, a country effect was found, even if the differences were very small. And in particular, Swedish and British children were found to be significantly more xenophobic compared to the Finnish ones. Moving to the association between food xenophobia and food consumption, the children have been categorized according to their food xenophobia level in low, medium, and high. And as can be possible to see from the graph, with increasing level of food xenophobia, the frequency consumption of fresh fruit and vegetables significantly decrease. And this is in line also with the actual behavioral measurement of the liking of the biscuits. Indeed, it is possible to see that children with high level of food xenophobia provided the significant lower hedonic scores compared to low and medium level of food xenophobia. Here are reported the Pearson correlation coefficients between the food consumption frequency and the food xenophobia level, overall and also by country. And in general, looking to the whole sample, negative association have been highlighted between the food xenophobia level and the whole grain, cereal, and biscuits consumption, as well as consumption of seed nuts, vegetables, and pasta. So in conclusion, the tool that was applied in the present study is easy to administer, robust and efficient with the young consumers from different European countries. And it has been also optimized recently in German language, even if the data are not published yet. And the tool was also able to detect cross-national differences in food xenophobia level. And also, it was able to demonstrate association between the food xenophobia and other behavioral measurements. Indeed, a higher food xenophobia in the European sample of 9-12 years old children is linked to a lower consumption of fresh fruit, vegetables, seed and nuts, pasta and whole grain biscuits, as well also to a lower acceptance of whole grain biscuits. So the tool can be useful in intervention aiming to change food xenophobia-related behaviors among European children. Thank you for your attention.
Christina. And now I would like to invite Valérie Lengarda-Almli that will present the study entitled Exploring Individual Differences in Texture Preferences, the Child Food Texture Preference Questionnaire.
Yes, thank you. Confirm if you see my slide.
Yes.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Valérie Almli. I'm a researcher in sensory science and consumer behavior at the Food Research Institute Nofima in Norway. So in this talk, I will briefly present the work that the E3S Working Group on Children did to develop a tool exploring individual preferences in texture perception. For more information about the presentation that I will do now, we invite you to look into the publication that was in Food Quality and Preference. Texture is the sensory manifestation of the structural, mechanical, and surface properties of foods, and it is detected through the combination of vision, hearing, and touch. It's a complex sensory property, and it has been called the forgotten attribute because for many years it received little attention in comparison with taste or flavor perception. But nowadays it's very well known that texture is a driver of likes and dislikes, and that differences in texture preferences are related to the way people process food in their mouth. So in recent work, Cheltema and colleagues have categorized adult consumers into crunchers, chewers, suckers, and smooshers. Texture is especially important for children because its perception changes with age, in line with the developments of the mouth muscles, the jaw and the teeth, and of the innervation of taste buds. It has been shown that children usually reject textures that are difficult to process in the mouth and generally prefer soft and uniform foods compared to hard, lumpy, or granular foods. As a consequence, texture properties of food can greatly influence our eating behavior and consequently our health. Recent literature reports that thinner textures lead to higher eating rates and that children who eat faster have a higher energy intake and an increased BMI Z-score. In order to investigate the role of texture preferences in modulating food consumption, we need a tool allowing to segment children according to their texture liker status. However, currently there are no child-friendly tools available to categorize young consumers based on their texture preference. Therefore, the aim of the present study was to develop and validate a self-administered child-friendly tool to investigate texture preferences in school-aged children. We also wanted the tool to be suitable across different European cultures. And we also wanted to explore with the new tool the association between texture preferences and background variables such as food neophobia, parental texture preferences, and food frequency consumption of healthy foods. Based on previous literature, pictures for 21 pairs of foods were chosen that would be familiar in Europe. Foods within a pair were as similar as possible regarding taste and aroma and differed mainly in texture. Texture differences were represented by hard versus soft foods, for example, hard candy and gummy candy, but also by particulate versus smooth foods, for example, yogurt with or without fruit pieces. After the selection, in a second step, we had several rounds of small tests, but a larger pre-test was conducted in Austria, Italy, Sweden, and the UK, with 8 to 11-year-old subjects to check children's familiarity and recognition of the food on the picture and label that we were presenting. The foods were presented one by one, and the children answered the question, have you ever tried this food, as is illustrated here with the crispy bacon, and provided a yes or no answer. So based on the pre-test, we discarded 4 food pairs that showed less than 70% familiarity in at least 2 countries. For example, the pair of peanuts and peanut butter. We also reworked the food pairs that showed less than 80% familiarity by changing the image or by changing the food name that was presented to designate the food. So for example, sorbet was replaced by ice lolly in the English version. We ended up with 17 food pairs that are familiar across cultures in Europe and that represent soft versus hard or particulate versus smooth textures. For simplicity, I will refer to these texture differences as hard versus soft. So here you see a glimpse of all the food pairs that were included in the questionnaire. And as you can see, they cover different food groups, such as meat, vegetables, grain products, and sweets. Then we conducted a large study in Austria, Italy, Sweden, the UK, Spain, and Finland, involving 570 children around 10 years old. The children completed the texture questionnaire, answering the question, which product do you prefer for each of the 17 pairs. Then they completed the familiarity test on each of the 34 images corresponding to the pairs, presented one by one. And last, they completed the food neophobia scale as introduced by Christina in the previous talk. A retest was conducted within 2 months with 90 children from 4 countries. In parallel, the parents completed the texture questionnaire for themselves and a food consumption frequency questionnaire focused on the intake of refined or whole grain products and fruit and vegetables for their child. I will now say a few words on the data analysis from the texture questionnaire, the child food texture preference questionnaire. For each child, an individual index was calculated, and the index could vary between 0 to 100, where a higher value indicates a higher preference for hard and particulate textures, while a lower value indicates a higher preference for soft and smooth textures. Only food pairs wherein both of the items were familiar to the child were taken into account in the calculation for the index of that child. We could also verify in the retest that individual scores were stable through time, indicating a good reliability of the measure. Then the frequency distribution of the index was calculated over all countries, and children were grouped into soft liker and hard liker groups, considering the 25th and 75th percentiles of the overall distribution as cutoffs. So over all countries, this led to the occurrence of 25% of soft likers and 27% of hard likers. So now to the results. We categorized children by texture liker groups for the different countries and could observe that in Finland and Sweden, there were more hard likers than sweet likers, while it was the opposite in Italy, Spain, and the UK, with more soft likers than hard likers. In Austria, the soft liker and hard liker groups were quite even. We also looked into the relationship between texture liker status of the child and his parent and observed a positive correlation between children and their parents. However, in general, adults had a clearly higher preference for hard and particulate textures with a mean index of 63 compared to the children who had a mean index of 50. When it comes to the relations with food neophobia, neophobic children tended to prefer softer textures, and this effect was particularly salient in Spain and in the UK. Finally, regarding food frequency consumption, the following patterns emerged. One, the soft likers consumed white bread and legumes more frequently than hard likers. And the hard likers consume vegetables and fresh fruits more frequently than the soft likers. This may also be linked to differences in food habits in Southern Europe with more soft likers and Northern Europe with more hard likers. So to conclude, the child food texture preference questionnaire developed in this study was child-friendly. It showed internal and external validity. It allowed us to reveal cross-country differences and was able to distinguish segments of children with different texture preferences. These segments differed in consumption frequency of healthy food and in food neophobia, in line with the directions that could be expected from the literature. So from there, future studies are encouraged to confirm and extend our findings in the preteen European population. But other possible avenues for further research include investigating age-related development in food texture preferences in children by testing other age groups. The tool could also be compared to the mouth behavior scale for adults developed by Cheltenham and colleagues. We suggest that associations of the texture liker status to pickiness may be investigated, as texture preferences may relate more directly to food pickiness than to food neophobia. And finally, it would be interesting to investigate the role of texture liker status in healthy consumption, eating rate, and calorie intake. I thank you for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer questions in the final session.
Valerie? And before inviting the next speaker, I would like to invite you to ask questions either through the small symbol you have on the top right. You have a triangle, circle, and square, so you can add questions there, or you can either write it in the chat. I see that there are several comments in the chat. So, okay, I will now invite the next speaker, Pernilla Sandvik from Uppsala University, Sweden. She will present the work entitled Children's, the role of food neophobia and cultural differences in children's descriptions and preferences for high fiber biscuits.
Thank you so much, Monica. Can you see my presentation?
Yes.
Yes.
I do.
Great. So I'm Pernilla Sandvik. I work as a senior lecturer at Uppsala University. And this presentation is based on a paper that we published in the journal named Foods, and further details can be found there. As you earlier heard Christina talk about, food neophobia is associated with a less varied range of food preferences, especially with regards to healthy foods, and also particularly fiber intake has shown to be lower among food neophobic children. And using parent-reported questionnaires, several studies have shown child food neophobia to be associated with higher levels of visual, tactile, smell, and taste sensitivity. And in addition to this potential higher sensory sensitivity, food neophobia has also been associated with higher degrees of anxiety. And we were interested in whether food neophobia induces a less or a more analytical approach towards the food's sensory characteristics. How does children with different degrees of food neophobia sensorially perceive food, and what role does different sensory attributes play in liking? In addition, few cross-cultural studies on school children's characterization and preference for food samples have been conducted in Europe. So the aim was to explore differences in liking and sensory perception of fiber-rich biscuits in a cross-cultural sample of children with different degrees of food neophobia. And as you've previously heard, we used 8 commercial biscuits as test stimuli, and these are shown in the table, descriptions of them. And the biscuits, as Monica said, are targeted towards adults, and the majority of them were rich in fiber, containing up to 10 grams of fiber per 100 grams. And we used, to explore this topic, we used the check all that apply method. And for you who are not familiar, this method is often abbreviated CATA, and it's a very simple method to define which sensory attributes consumers perceive in food products. So test subjects receive a list of attributes, like the one you see in the picture, and after tasting the test stimuli, they're asked to choose all the words that they perceive describe the test product. So before the main data collection, a pre-study was done to generate kata terms using a word elicitation task. And this was done in an individual interview setting with 66 children of the target age group. The aim was to ensure a broad range of descriptive words for the sample of biscuits, as well as a good understanding of the kata terms by the subjects in the main test, so the children in the different countries. And the pre-test, the elicitation was done in 4 countries in order to capture cultural differences. So each child received 3 of the biscuits and were asked to look, smell, feel, taste, and describe the biscuit. And in total, 354 sensory descriptive words were elicited. And out of these, 18 were included in the study. And this was based on citation frequency and relevancy for characterizing the biscuits. And finally, the terms were carefully translated to the different languages. And here are the included kata terms belonging to the modality appearance, texture, and taste flavor. We have, for example, lumpy, bumpy appearance, crunchy texture, and sweet taste. So we used the child food neophobia scale previously described to classify children into different levels of food neophobia. And the biscuits were tasted in randomized balanced order, and after tasting a biscuit, the child were asked to rate liking using a facial hedonic scale, the one you see on the picture here. And further, they were asked to perform the kata task and tick all the words out of the 18 that describe the tasted biscuit. And in addition, after tasting the 8 biscuit samples, the child were asked to think about their ideal imaginary biscuit and answer to the same questions for this perfect fantasy biscuit. And here are a selection of some of the results. So on average, children use 6 out of 18 terms, kata terms, to describe the biscuits. And food neophobia was associated with the use of fewer words to describe the samples. And this trend was the strongest in Italy and weakest in Sweden. So we had some country differences here. As Christina mentioned, overall food neophobia was associated with a lower liking of these tasted biscuits. And with regards to country differences, children in Spain used more appearance attributes when describing the biscuits compared to children in Sweden and in the UK. Okay, regarding drivers of biscuit liking, principal coordinate analysis links children's kata descriptions to liking and showed similar results in the groups we compared, so for food neophobia in the different countries. So therefore this figure shows results for the whole sample. And we can see that liking is positively associated with sweet taste and tempting appearance, and negatively related to whole wheat appearance and cereal taste. And in this next figure, it shows the symmetric plot, and here also the imaginary ideal perfect biscuit has been added to the analysis. And here we can see that an ideal biscuit is characterized by attributes unhealthy appearance, soft, smooth texture, and sweet taste, and not by whole wheat, cereal, or grainy. And we can also see that none of the samples, which are shown in blue, actually fall in the ideal direction. The 2 chocolate biscuits are the closest, but they are too hard to be ideal here. We also performed something called a penalty analysis, and this classified the kata attributes as must have, nice to have, does not influence, does not harm, and must not have. And here we can see the results for the different neophobia status groups. And with regards to drivers of liking, degree of neophobia affected particularly appearance and textural attributes, while no differences were found for taste and flavor attributes. So for food neophobic, the biscuits must not look lumpy or bumpy, and not look like it contains whole wheat or whole grain. And country-wise differences were also revealed. So here we have Finland, Italy, Spain, Sweden, and the UK. Particularly, we found differences with regards to texture. So while crunchiness was a must-have in Spain and Sweden, it was a must-not-have in the UK, and an indifferent attribute in Italy and Finland. Further, while the Spanish subjects strongly favor or rejected 5 out of the 8 texture attributes, the Italian subjects showed no particular preferences for any of them. So cross-country differences here. So food neophobia affects how the sensory attributes of foods are perceived and evaluated in 9 to 12-year-old children. So the neophobic children use fewer kata terms. This was a little bit surprising to us, and we discussed in the paper, for example, if this could be related to the lower reported liking of the biscuits, or if it's a lower interest in food in general in this group. Cultural differences also played a role, especially in the use of appearance attributes and in the preference or rejection of texture properties. And we think this study highlights the necessity of being cautious when generalizing results to different countries, as well as importance of considering individual factors such as food neophobia when interpreting results from sensory studies with children. And finally, findings of the present study may be useful for practitioners to develop healthy alternative formulations of familiar foods that are well accepted by children, with the aim of promoting consumption, especially among neophobic children. So thank you very much for listening.
Much, Pernilla, for your talk. And I will now invite Marlies Hormann-Wollner from the University of Applied Science, Joanneum, Austria. So please, Marlies, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Can you see my slide?
Yes, in presentation mode. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So, hi to all of you. I'm Marlies. I'm senior researcher at the FH Joanneum, University of Applied Sciences in Austria. And I'm going now to kind of finish the first E3S webinar presentation and show you our results from the so-called last published paper. This paper was published in Frontiers in Nutrition, and it was published in February. So it's on intake on fiber, associated foods and texture preferences in relation to the weight status of the children in 6 European countries. So I want to drop right into the background. As you already heard, children prefer softer foods than adults, and they also dislike pieces, and the texture of vegetables is disliked often too. So it's relevant to the children. We know that foods that are high in fiber are often more difficult to manipulate in the mouth compared to the low fiber versions. And they are often harder, and we know also that the fiber consumption is very low across Europe, and also in all the Western societies. This data are mainly from adults because there are low data from children. And but what we know is that we should increase our whole grain, vegetable, and fruit consumption. And because there are multiple health benefits with the fiber intake, like if you think on a better digestion, also longer saturation, or even lower cholesterol levels are coming with a higher fiber intake. And there is comes across the lower energy intake. And if you think on the weight status, we can, or and lower BMI is assumed. So why that's important? Because we know that we have an increasing BMI across Europe and also worldwide. So this is very important, and therefore we also hypothesized, or we wanted to verify whether a higher intake of high fiber foods would be correlated with a lower BMI in children. And we also wanted to verify, secondly, if a higher preference for soft textures and a lower consumption of plant-based high fiber foods would be connected with a higher BMI in children. In total, for this paper, we had the subset of 330 children and parent pairs. As we mentioned before, that about 340 parents responded and reported for their children, and yeah, almost all we could include within this analysis here. So we had the CFTPQ, you already heard about that, and we also had the FFQ, so food frequency questionnaires for high and low fiber foods. So we it was a 17 items food frequency questionnaire where we calculated the daily food equivalence of some high and low fiber food items and also food groups. Here we included mainly the plant foods. And a third, we also took into account the BMI. We had the BMI reported by the parents, but we also could measure it in 2 countries. And as we are working with children, it was very important that we take into consideration that the children are still growing. So it is important to use percentiles, and we classified our children according to the CDC criteria. And those 3 methods were checked then for associations. And I want to show you some of the results now. So, so first of all, there was no correlation for the texture preference measured by the CFTPQ at all and the BMI, except for Austria. But there was a very low number of Austrians we could include into the analysis, so we have to verify this this result again. So, but there was no further correlation. But overall, in our study population, we found a few connections that were very plausible when looking at the foods, like there was a higher BMI intake. You see here the negative correlations and here the positive correlations. The intake of whole grain cereals and the total amount of all consumed whole grain foods was lower when the BMI percentiles were increasing. And the other way around, we had with higher BMI white biscuit consumption, we had a higher BMI percentiles. So both of the results, so with the whole grain cereals and the whole grain foods, was driven mainly by males, and the whole grain cereals were influenced by the Italian children, but this was only borderline significant. And furthermore, we were a bit surprised. We found some unexpected results, like we found increasing consumption of white pasta with a decreasing BMI. This was pronounced in females, as well as the correlation of legumes. So with the higher consumption of legumes, the BMI was increasing. So although the legumes is a high fiber food, the BMI was increasing, and this was also pronounced more in females and was driven mainly by Spain and the UK. Furthermore, we do not reveal another connection for the BMI percentiles and other food groups, like for fruits or vegetables. We did not find any association here. And I also want to show you some country-specific results here. I only want to point out some of them. For instance, here, the whole grain biscuits, we had a positive correlation with the BMI percentiles in Sweden, but a negative, on the other hand, in Finland. So the same was for seeds and nuts, which was a positive correlation in Sweden as well with the BMI percentiles, and a negative one in Spain. So We also assume here that maybe our results, the country-specific results, were influenced by quite low numbers on each country. So we could only include data where we had response from the parents. And so this was about, I think we had about a bit more than 50% of the response of the parents. So taken together, we found cultural differences across the countries, and we also found sex-specific differences in the connection between the BMI percentiles and single food items or food groups. And we also found the connection between the BMI and high and low fiber foods. Regarding the legume consumption, which was an unexpected result. We speculate that, that this was maybe in the content of the consumption of highly processed foods, or like, say, fast food, because also legumes, if they are healthy, can be combined in an unhealthy way, like if you consume it in as a baked beans, which are very salty or sweet, or you consume it as a high-fat curry or a stew with meat and bacon. So this might have also influenced the result here. So we think that if we do further research, the processing of foods, the preparation and recipes are very important determinants of food consumption. And so what we did not find was an association between texture, perception, and the BMI in the overall samples. Maybe this is also due to the CFTBQ was based on soft and hard texture, but not on the fiber content itself from the FFQ items. So there was this difference. So maybe this could be, could be influenced the result. So I hope that you got an impression of our work in this short presentation. I want to thank all the ladies for the great teamwork, and thank you for your attention. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Marlies, for your presentation. I thank all the speakers for their presentations, and I open now the discussion by inviting also the rest of the B-tex team. I've seen that there are some ladies that have joined the webinar: Lisa Metven, Gertrude Zenstra, and Valerie and Marie Sandel. Sorry. So they are also invited to answer questions. I've seen there is a question indeed in the questions and answer option. So there is a question from Bettina, and maybe to make this general discussion more dynamic, we can also ask Bettina maybe to switch on the camera and ask directly to Pernilla, and there is also a partial reply by Lisa. So
no, we were having a discussion. No, indeed, it was about biscuits in particular, and you were mentioning that these must avoid attributes. No, if I remember right, you said like lumpiness, or the fact that they could see the bits of fibers or something. Mm-hmm. So we're just throwing out there a question about what could we do to, and I was also replying to Lisa, these picky eaters, and is there anything else beyond the properties of the food itself that you might have explored? I don't know, storytelling or driving the attention elsewhere?
Well, I can start by answering. I think that, well, the penalty analysis, maybe we can see it as a way to become aware of which properties that are important for children, in this case with food neophobia, and maybe instead of seeing them as must not have, seeing them as properties to be aware of. So indeed, exposure is a magic way to increase liking, but it's not always easy to do, especially if the child is have a very high degree of food neophobia or is very picky. but one way here might be to target these must not have characteristics, and perhaps stepwise try to change them, and stepwise try to expose the child for them and improve liking that way. So not make the biscuits, for example, very lumpy bumpy, but start with small lumps and bumps perhaps in a way to increase liking stepwise.
Thanks.
There are any other questions? I can't. Yes, there is probably another one.
I think there is one question for me. So it's the question is, I was wondering.
Sarah, I think it's E3S secretary. It's you, Sarah, that is asking the question.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so if you want to ask directly to Marlies.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I was wondering if you investigated the gender differences in the whole sample, because I saw in the slide that you considered each country, but I was wondering if you already tested this also to have a larger sample.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Thank you for clarifying, because the first slide I showed, it was from the overall samples. So we included 140 boys and 160 girls within our sample, and on this slide, all of those children were included. So it was from the big sample.
Okay, thank you. So, miss this.
Welcome.
Okay, thank you. And there is another question by Camilla. Camilla, if you want to switch on your camera and ask, indeed, it is a question to all the ladies.
Yeah, can you see me?
Yes.
Good afternoon to all. Yes, I was wondering, since the German questionnaire of food neophobia was not included in the presentation, but if I remember well, Christina said that it has been optimized. I would like to know how do you have optimized the questionnaire for the German children?
Okay, thank you for the question. I think that this is a question that can be answered by Marlies, right?
Yeah, thank you. So, thank you, Camilla, for your question. So we were thinking on how we can improve the German version, and what we did, we reworded so the German version to make it more clear. We simplified it, and so we then repeated it in other schools, because we also saw that in our first trial there were lots of not German natives, so maybe this was too difficult for them. And now we repeated it with about 90 children, and it was fine. So we have a good internal quality. So we are very happy that it worked.
Okay, thank you, Marlies.
Welcome.
Can't see questions. Let's see maybe in the chat if there is something that is added.
I can see two raised hands from Paola and Erminio.
Ah, sorry, I didn't see you. Sorry, Erminio and Paola. I don't know who was the first, but maybe ladies first, if you are okay, Erminio.
Yes, sure.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I have many questions in my head, but I wanted to know a bit about the next steps, and because you studied so many different parameters, so I was wondering, for example, did you see a kind of an evolution with 8 different age groups, if they behave differently as in these relations, for example, neophobia and texture, or BMI and texture? Could it be or preference based on texture? Could it be that different age groups would have different relations, thinking that, for example, neophobia evolves with age? And in particularly, I was quite interested in if you have concrete plans to find more correlations or data regarding eating styles and as related to food intake or potentially overweight, if there is something underlying texture that could be related to that. Sorry, I think I made like 10 questions in one, but I had to use my chance.
No problem. I was taking note, Paola, for the further studies. I was taking note for some input from you. So thank you for your question. And I think that this is a question that can be opened indeed to all the ladies of the B-tex team. For what I can say is that it would be nice to continue with the project, because it, as also Mary and Gertrude and Lisa wrote, it was a very great collaboration, considering that this was only partially funded. So each country contributed in funding, so it was very demanding. So if we will have the opportunity, we will be very happy, I think, to continue. But of course, it depends on funding and so on. And your suggestion about looking at the evolution of food neophobia with age and the relation with texture is very relevant. I would like to ask to the other ladies if maybe they have undertaken some research in their countries that can answer your questions, and if they have inputs from their own research studies, maybe.
Maybe I can add a little bit.
Monica, no, not in Norway, but I really think it's interesting. For example, the childhood texture questionnaire. I mean, I suspect, or we suspect from pretest also, that it could be suitable for also younger children. I'm not sure how young, but so it could be very interesting to also try younger children. And of course, we could also try older children and have the same type of studies related to their texture preference.
Yeah.
Yeah, congrats to all the team, because it's been amazing amount of science that you have done, and thanks for answering.
Thank you, Paula. There was also Lisa that wanted to add something, I think.
Thanks. I was just, well, a couple of, again, like Paolo, I tend to probably answer a question with other 10 questions. One is, in terms of funding, I think one of the key things is to be able to have enough people in the study, because it looks a reasonably nice number here at 600 plus, but I mean, obviously it comes down to quite small numbers within each country, really. And I think that the problem with that is also the bias in, if you aren't particularly strongly funded in this, the bias is towards, you know, a moderate socioeconomic group or higher socioeconomic group actually as well. And so when we're looking at food neophobia, one aspect is age, but I think the other aspect that, as Bettina has just started to discuss earlier on the chat, was around we're learning to like an exposure. And one thing that we tend to find in a more disadvantaged community is obviously that the food breadth that a child might be exposed to can be quite a lot smaller, and therefore you're less likely to overcome food neophobia. And as we know, there is links between potentially between neophobia and BMI. So I think larger studies looking definitely across socioeconomic group more as well as age would be really, really valuable actually. Yeah. In my opinion, so in terms of exposure and learning to like, we've published something recently outside of this on taste exposure, looking at genetic differences in taste sensitivity, and still finding that exposure beats everything, you know, from that perspective, which is great news. And obviously Monica as well has been looking at oral tactile sensitivity in children too. So I think it's still worth us, you know, it's great that we progress the work on sensitivity, but trying to incorporate more factors in terms of age, social economic group, etc., and exposure is so important, is my opinion. Thanks.
Oops.
I totally agree, I think, on what has been said. And in the Netherlands so far, we didn't have any other studies, but I think it would also be very interesting to include other foods. We now tested it on biscuits, but it would be very interesting to have these type of studies besides different ages, different socioeconomic groups, also different foods. I think that would be really interesting.
I totally agree with Gertrude, because maybe the differences that we found between the food neophobia, for example, level and the liking of the biscuits, and the differences were very small, maybe could be strengthened with the use, for example, of an actual liking ratings of novel food, or something that maybe is perceived as significantly more unfamiliar or new from the children. So I totally agree with her that using other food formulation or model food could be really interesting.
I think, Monica, we cannot hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. If
Sorry. Thank you, Sarah.
No, my question was very similar to Paula's question. So it was mainly focused on what next, and I think that there are other psychological traits that should be included working with children that have been not largely investigated yet, and starting from disgust, for example, that could be very interesting, but also the positive side. So sensation seeking could be quite interesting to see. I mean, we always look at barriers, but we should also sometimes look at facilitators of changes, and give some optimist signal would be good. But in general, I think that working on other psychological traits would be very interesting.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Erminio, for your contribution.
Could I say something shortly?
Yeah, sure, Mari. Hi.
This is Mari, and greetings from Finland. I still want to say that also we do have already nice publications, and we have done a great job with those results. The data itself is pretty unique, and we all remember that how hard work it was to collect it. So I think that we still, I mean, there were plenty of variables that we could still dig if we just have energy, and of course we have, because we are very energetic people in Europe. And I think that that's something that we should still think about, and I think that's partly also something that I need to do. That what could be those things that we haven't really studied that well yet, because the data is very unique, and what is nice that it was really collected in North Europe and South Europe and also West Europe, and it's very these kind of data doesn't exist too much, where also different countries are compared, and especially this age of groups. So yeah, and it has been so fun also, not only the pure and hard science, but I think that it has been really pleasure to collaborate with this group. So thank you also for that. And congratulations, E3S. It's nice to have 10 years birthday, almost the same age as our children were in this study.
Yes, thank you, Mari, for your contribution. And indeed, I have to thank the E3S board, because they supported very much this project. They were always very supporting, also revising the data access and management agreement. Erminio was always there to provide suggestion, Ella also. So a big thank to all the E3S, because we are very happy and proud of this study. So we hope very much to go further with this project. Okay, now it's 5 o'clock. We are perfectly in time. I thank you very much for your participation, And I would like to remember you the next E3S PDO Working Group webinar that will be that is planned for July 13th. And thank you again, and see you soon. Bye bye.
See you soon.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao. Congratulations. Ciao.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Moi
Thank
moi.
you.
Bye.